In 2010, researchers handed a group of volunteers a bottle of ordinary painkillers, acetaminophen, the kind sitting in your bathroom cabinet for headaches and twisted ankles, and told them to take 2 a day for 3 weeks. Then they measured something no painkiller should be able to touch. They measured how much it hurt to be left out. Every evening, the volunteers recorded the small daily injuries of social life, being ignored, excluded, dismissed. And across 3 weeks, the group on the painkiller reported measurably less of it than the group on placebo. Later, when researchers put people in a brain scanner and had them experience rejection, the drug blunted that response too. A pill, designed for damaged tissue, reduced the pain of being excluded. There are 2 ways to read that. The comfortable version is that social pain is soft, a lesser sensation borrowing machinery built for real injuries. The evidence supports the other version. Somewhere deep in the human body, there is a system that does not distinguish between being wounded and being alone. It files them under the same emergency. And it has been doing this so consistently, for so long, that you can measure it in blood, in gene expression, in the architecture of a night's sleep, in the speed at which skin closes over a cut. Which leaves one question. If your body treats isolation as an injury, what does it consider the treatment? The answer turned out to be so specific that a generation of scientists spent 20 years trying to explain it away. Start with the scale, because the scale is what dragged serious researchers into a subject most of them considered sentimental. Julianne Holt-Lunstad pooled 148 studies, following more than 300,000 people. She wasn't asking about happiness, she was asking about death. People with strong social relationships had roughly a 50% greater likelihood of surviving a given follow-up period than people without them. That number sits in the same neighborhood as the risk factors we run national campaigns about. There is no campaign for this one, no screening test, no leaflet. But a mortality statistic tells you something is happening. It doesn't tell you what. So go into the body. At UCLA, the genomics researcher Steve Cole asked a question that sounds impossible. Does loneliness change which of your genes are switched on? It does. In chronically lonely people, a cluster of genes governing inflammation is turned up. A cluster governing antiviral defense is turned down. Read that again. The immune system has reallocated its budget. Without consulting you, it has concluded that the likeliest threat you face is not a virus, but a wound, and it has begun preparing for bleeding at the expense of preparing for infection. Now go one layer deeper, into the night. John Cacioppo, the University of Chicago neuroscientist who essentially founded this field, found that lonely people don't necessarily sleep fewer hours. They sleep worse in one specific way. They surface more often. Brief micro-awakenings scattered through the night, which the sleeper almost never remembers. His interpretation reorganizes how you see your own species. This is what a nervous system does when it sleeps at the edge of the camp instead of the middle of it. For nearly all of human history, sleep was the most dangerous thing you did. You lay down unconscious in the dark, and the only reason that was survivable is that someone else was breathing nearby. Someone else would wake. Someone else was, quite literally, on watch. Take that away, and the brain doesn't simply feel lonely. It refuses to fully stand down. Night after night, in a locked apartment, in a city of 9 million people, a nervous system built for the savannah quietly declines to sleep as deeply as it could because it has calculated that nobody is watching the perimeter. Cacioppo found one more thing. Tracing decades of data, he showed that loneliness spreads through a social network. If someone you're connected to becomes lonely, your own risk rises. It moves outward along the edges of a network, the way a contagious illness would. So this is the antagonist of our story. Not sadness, not solitude, which many people choose and thrive in. A chronic, unresolved biological alarm running in the background of tens of millions of lives and spreading, which brings researchers to the question they were confident they could answer. What switches the alarm off? They tested friendship networks, frequency of contact, volunteering, club membership, religious attendance, number of confidants. Almost all of it helped, somewhat. But one variable kept outperforming the others across countries, across decades, and the strangest part was where it appeared. It showed up in studies that weren't looking for it. Cardiac surgeons found it in survival data. Immunologists found it in wound healing experiments. Sleep researchers found it in brain waves, a long-term, high-quality pair bond. In most datasets, marriage. And everyone in the field immediately raised the same objection you're probably raising now. Marriage is a contract. It's a form filed in a government office and a party with expensive catering. Explain, biologically, how a piece of paper reaches into someone's bloodstream and changes their gene expression. It doesn't. It can't. And the data will show us that it doesn't. Something else is doing the work. To see it, you have to walk into a windowless room at the University of Virginia, where a psychologist is about to threaten people with electricity. A woman lies inside an fMRI scanner. The machine hammers around her. An electrode is attached to her ankle. On a screen above her face, a red X means she may receive a shock in the next few seconds. Not dangerous. Genuinely unpleasant. Every time the X appears, her threat network lights up exactly as it should. Then, in 2006, James Coan added one variable. Through an opening in the side of the scanner, someone reaches in and takes her hand. Sometimes it's a stranger from the research team. Sometimes it's her husband. The stranger's hand helped a little. The husband's hand did something else. Activity in threat-related regions dropped substantially. The alarm quieted. And when the shock arrived, she rated it as physically less painful. Same voltage, same electrode, same nervous system. But that isn't the finding that matters. This is the effect scaled with the quality of the marriage. Women in the strongest relationships showed the largest calming effect. As relationship quality dropped, so did the benefit. The hand was just a hand. What differed was what her nervous system had learned, over years, to expect from the person attached to it. Coan built a theory from this that begins with an insult. Your brain is a miser. It burns about a fifth of your body's energy while making up 2% of your weight. Like anything expensive, it has evolved to cut costs ruthlessly, and its favored economy is outsourcing. If it can avoid computing something, it won't. His argument is that the brain treats trusted people not as company, but as external resources, load-bearing parts of its own infrastructure. Vigilance can be shared. Threat assessment can be shared. Risk, memory, effort. When a reliable other is present, the brain doesn't just feel better. It runs a cheaper program because it has correctly calculated that it isn't facing the world alone, which inverts something most of us never examine. We treat solitude as the neutral human state and connection as the addition. The data says the reverse. Proximity is the baseline the machine was built for. Solitude is the expensive condition, and the body prices it accordingly. So if the brain is spending less, what happens to everything else? It shows up first in the stress system. Cortisol isn't a villain. It's a mobilization signal, rising in the morning and tapering to nothing at night. when the repair crews come on shift. Under chronic threat, that curve flattens. The evening descent never arrives. A system built for sprints idles at elevated revolutions permanently, and the bill arrives years later as hypertension, insulin resistance, and accelerated cellular aging. Holt-Lunstad had 300 people wear blood pressure monitors continuously for 24 hours, around 70 readings each, taken as they lived ordinary lives. Happily, married participants showed deeper nocturnal dipping, the nighttime drop in blood pressure that predicts long-term cardiovascular outcomes, better than any reading taken in a clinic. Their bodies were standing down at night more completely, which loops us back to that unsleeping century and to a small, strange study out of Germany. 12 couples were wired for full polysomnography across 4 nights, sleeping some nights beside their partner and some alone. When they slept together, they got more REM sleep. Not less, despite moving around more. Longer, less fragmented, and their sleep stages synchronized with each other across the night, with the degree of synchronization tracking how deep the couple rated the relationship. REM is where the brain consolidates memory and diffuses the previous day's fear. 12 couples is a small sample, and it needs replication. But the direction is provocative. 2 nervous systems in one bed appear to fall into a shared rhythm. Then there's the finding that should be impossible. Janice Kiecolt-Glaser brought married couples into a research unit and raised small, controlled blister wounds on their forearms. Then she asked them to have a conversation on one visit supportive, on the other a genuine unresolved conflict. 20 minutes, recorded, later coded for hostility. Then everyone went home, and the only thing left to measure was how fast skin closes. The consistently hostile couples healed at roughly 60% of the rate of the low hostility couples. Same wounds, same protocol, same hospital food. A 20-minute argument, visible weeks later in the closing of a wound. The effect reaches into thinking, too. Under sustained stress, the brain shifts away from goal-directed behavior, the slow, deliberate system that weighs future outcomes, and toward habit, the fast system that repeats whatever it did last time. Stress doesn't make you stupid. It makes you reflexive. That's correct engineering for a predator in the grass, and catastrophic for a career, a savings account, or a skill you're initially humiliating at. All of those require a nervous system willing to accept discomfort now for a return that won't arrive for years. Economists call that a long-time horizon, and it isn't a personality trait. It stretches and contracts with felt security. But before this starts sounding like an argument for weddings, look at what happened in that same blood pressure study. The happily married did best. The unhappily married didn't merely lose the benefit, they did worse than the single participants. Higher blood pressure than people, with no partner at all. And a supportive network of friends did not rescue them. That single result dismantles the moralizing version of this subject. Being married was never the protective factor. The protective factor is a specific condition, reliable emotional safety, that some marriages contain, some never develop, and some systematically destroy. It's one mechanism with a sign attached, and the sign can be negative. You can quit a job. You cannot commute away from the person sleeping beside you. So it isn't the institution. It's something the institution occasionally holds. Which raises the last question: how deep does that thing actually go? Everything we've described depends on 2 people who remember each other. So what remains if you take the memory away? There is a man in England who has been, entirely unwillingly, the experiment that answers this. In March 1985, Clive Wearing was one of the most accomplished musicians in Britain, a conductor, a scholar of Renaissance music, a BBC producer. He had married Deborah about a year earlier. Then he got what looked like flu. It was herpes, simplex, encephalitis, an ordinary virus taking a vanishingly rare route into the brain. By the time anyone identified it, it had destroyed his hippocampi. Clive survived. His memory did not. What remains is among the most severe amnesia ever documented. His conscious memory spans between 7 and 30 seconds. He loses the beginning of a sentence before reaching its end. He knows he has children from an earlier marriage but cannot recall their names. He knows he was a musician and cannot remember a single performance he gave. Because he can't record the passage of time, he lives inside a permanent, repeating conviction that he has just this instant regained consciousness. For years, his carers gave him a diary. He filled it with entries announcing he had, at that very moment, woken for the first time, then crossed out the line above as an obvious error. Because he had no memory of writing it and no explanation for why his own handwriting was already on the page. An entire life compressed into a single, unrepeating instant, over and over, for decades. And then a door opens, and Deborah walks in. Every single time Clive crosses the room, he takes hold of her. He weeps with relief, as though she has come back from years away, as though something unbearable has just ended. If she steps out for 2 minutes and returns, it happens again, at full force. He cannot tell you one thing they have ever done together. He has no memory of their wedding, their courtship, or her visit 10 minutes ago. And yet the instant she appears, his entire system reorganizes around her, and he knows beneath language, beneath recall, exactly who she is and what she means. The neurology is precise. The hippocampus lays down conscious autobiographical memory. It is not the seat of everything. Skills live elsewhere, which is why Clive can still sit at a keyboard and play, his hands remembering what his mind cannot, and attachment runs through other structures the illness left him. The bond is not stored where the memories of the bond were stored. It survived the destruction of the system that held their entire shared history. The human part is harder than the neuroscience. Deborah fought for 7 years for treatment, for care, for anyone to take the case seriously, while her husband lived on a general hospital ward because there was nowhere to put him. No recovery was coming. Eventually, she broke. She divorced him in 1992, moved to America, tried to build a life. She came back. On Easter Sunday, in 2002, Deborah and Clive were married a second time. She has written that they knelt, and their joined hands were wrapped together in a golden sash. He would not remember the ceremony. He did not need to. So here is where all of this lands, and it isn't where you'd expect. Nothing in this evidence tells you to get married. The data doesn't say that. Roughly half of marriages in wealthy countries end. The research on unhappy ones is unambiguous, and staying inside one for statistical reasons would be self-harm, wearing the costume of prudence. There are people who will live longer and freer alone than they ever would partnered, and not one number here contradicts them. What the evidence describes was never an institution. It's a physiological state. It's what happens to a nervous system that has accumulated, over years, enough evidence to stop bracing. A brain that has quietly recalculated the cost of being alive not because of a promise or a ceremony, but because of thousands of ordinary, unremarkable days that all ended the same way. No vow produces that. Only repetition does. Only a sufficient number of nights where someone was still there in the morning. Marriage is simply one of the oldest containers our species built for holding time and proof in the same place, long enough for the body to believe it. That's the hidden power. Not the ring, not the paperwork, not the name change at the county office. It's the moment, somewhere in an unremarkable evening, when the oldest and most suspicious structure in your brain, the part that has been scanning the horizon since long before there were words for horizons, the part that files your loneliness under time's injury, the part that keeps you half awake in an empty house, finally lowers its guard. Not because the world got any safer, because, for the first time in a very long time, it isn't the only one keeping watch.